It's Two on the Aisle with me, Charles Gross, and Leslie Hoban Blake. Tonight, reviews of The Confession of Lily Dare, Bob Carroll, Ted and Alice, Paris, and the Soldier's Play, plus an interview with Ifa Bayeza,
who is the sister of ntozake shange.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Two on the Aisle. And hello again, Leslie. How are you?
Hello, Charlie. I'm a little sad today.
Oh, why is that?
Well, we lost a dear friend, both of mine and of the show's, over the weekend. On Valentine's Day, our dear Lynn Cohen passed away, and I knew her for 32 years, and as you know, we were close.
Certainly.
So I'm sad, but the show must go on.
Lynn is probably best known for her role on Sex and the City, but she was a major presence in the theater.
Absolutely.
And we actually have an interview with her from 2015 that you can find on YouTube.
We hope you'll look for it. Yes, it'd be nice if people watched it.
The Confession of Lily Dare, the latest work by Charles Busch, one of our favorite playwrights, and written and, of course, starring Charles Busch. And this, as is often the case with Mr. Busch's work, this could have been a movie done in the 1930s in the pre-Hays Hollywood for, say, 20th Century Fox or Warner Brothers, where Busch plays the dame, and in this case, Lily Dare is kind of part Rosalind Russell, part Barbara Stanwyck.
Oh, there's a too late. Pre-Code was much earlier actors than that.
And Mae West.
Well, definitely.
Well,
Mae
again,
West.
just because it's set in pre-code doesn't mean he can't stretch his reach, which he does. Now, in this case, Lily Dare is this sweet young thing. She grew up in a convent, but her mother dies. She never knew her father, and she must go live with her aunt, who runs a brothel. And from there, Lily goes from nightclub singer to brothel owner to...
Well, along the way, she has a baby.
Yes, which she has to give up.
And in true pre-code form, she has to give up the baby.
Right, because it was out of wedlock.
Yes, out of wedlock.
And the baby's father dies in an earthquake because this is San Francisco.
And she was really in love with the young man, and there's the earthquake in San Francisco.
It's vintage Busch. And vintage Busch, especially when directed by Carl Andrus, tends to be very campy. And normally that's perfect for a Busch play. This may be the one exception, because the first act is campy, subtly so, but campy nonetheless, especially
subtle camp.
when Mr. Busch goes off on a tear, which he occasionally does, and it kind of slumps, which surprised me. I found myself losing interest. I said, oh, yeah, this is getting to be old hat. Then the second act, where they, forgive the expression, more or less play it straight. And you really have a very sharp drama and something very worthy of the source that it emulates.
Well, that's very interesting that you'd put it that way. Remember that Charles plays the woman all the way through.
Yes.
But he plays her differently in different parts. This is a dramedy, for want of a better word. They were weepies in the old days, with all the crying and the tears and the giving up of the baby and whatnot. And what happens that's really wonderful, and Charles writes the best parts for the people that he works with. He gives so much. Nancy Anderson, Christopher Borg, Howard McGillen from Phantom of the Opera, Kendall Sparks and Jennifer Van Dyke play multiple roles. Right. And they are really good in the multiple roles.
Right. Well, Nancy Anderson and Kendall Sparks generally are playing Lily's two best friends.
Right. And this is done in the format of a documentary, in that they start at her grave. They start at Lily Dare's grave. And it's all a flashback. And then you come back to the grave, and they blow her a kiss.
Jennifer Van Dyke plays several roles, including the daughter, who finally meets her mother at the end. And it's a real tearjerker.
And one of the funniest things I've ever seen is Lily telepathically, because Lily was a trained opera singer herself, Lily telepathically sending her daughter the way to do, without ever having met her daughter, sending her how to sing the role. I don't know if it was Violetta. I think it was Violetta in Traviata. I believe that was and the role. She was too much of a lady to sing it, so it took Lily to send her the kind of the bawdy end of it. I found this hysterical.
Yeah, I loved the second act, and I liked the first, say, 30% of the first act. But most of the first act, I think, ugh. And again, I'm a big fan of
Most of the first act or
Busch's
the
work.
second act?
The first act.
Oh.
The first act really does not make it. It stretches, it slumps, but the second act totally redeems it. So you have
it takes you all the way through. For heaven's sakes, it takes you all the way through
the woman's life.
Well, not just the woman's life. I mean, you managed to get the earthquake of 1903.
Yes.
You know,
and the Great Depression.
And the Great Depression. Yes,
and a whole bunch of other things.
Right. So it really gets right through. Where he's really trying to do perhaps a more serious turn on the stuff that he always does. And I love the Mae West character. I loved her in that gown that, you know, was form-fitting gown.
Again, sometimes Lily is Mae West, sometimes she's Barbara Stanwyck. You know,
well, she's always dressed wrong for the period. I mean, she's always in a long dress with a, you know, with long sleeves and looks out of sorts no matter what. The others are dressed pretty much period appropriate.
Right.
But I mean, what can you say? It's Charles Busch. You either love Charles or you don't.
Well, I do love him.
And we love him. So.
Your conclusion?
How many playbills would
yes,
I give it?
At 1 to 5.
I would agree with you that this is not A1 prime Busch, and I would give it a 4.5 as a result. Yeah.
Okay. So anything less than 5 is not. That's pretty good for.
Because he is a 5 mostly.
Yeah. I would say 3 3/4, possibly 4.
Okay. All right. You really did have a problem with it that I didn't.
Next, a musical of a movie that was revolutionary for its time. Bob Carroll, Ted and Alice.
Which is no longer particularly revolutionary or for its time. It's very interesting what they tried to do here. This was a revolutionary movie. I remember this movie. I remember going to see it, and it had Natalie Wood, and it had Robert Culp, and it had Barbara Streisand's then husband.
Elliot Gould.
Elliot Gould. And I'm sorry, I'm having a vocal problem today. I will do the best I can. I'll go through it as best I can. And these are very earnest young people trying to do the part. It's about Esalen in California, the famous sex therapy spa, where very well-to-do people would go and they would free themselves of all their inhibitions and basically walk around naked, and they would have seminars in the nude, et cetera. And this was all big, you know, this was the 70s. It was, people were walking around nude in the streets if they could. And as I say, even the movie, they didn't really go nude. They were all playing around with the idea of going nude, but they didn't do it. And it's very of its time. It's very difficult to make it a musical. I don't understand why they made it a musical.
Well, I tried to watch the movie the other night, and it looked dated. and the musical looked dated. The one innovation they have is Susan Vega, who is
Suzanne Vega,
excuse me, who stands in back, sings occasionally, plays multiple roles, and is kind of the overlooking on this, and that actually works very nicely. But the basic premise of Bob Carroll, Ted and Alice really does not. This is a book by Jonathan Mark Sherman, music by Duncan Sheik, who wrote...
and lyrics with Duncan Sheik and Amanda Green. And so we have a reason.
And
we
she
have
wrote
a right,
Spring Awakening. So
we have a right to expect something more from this. And by the way, Jonathan Mark Sherman is an award-winning playwright.
Yeah.
So
you've got, and it's got Elliot directed. Listen, you've got a pedigreed
absolutely. The
team
pedigree
here.
precedes it, and I don't think it lives up to the pedigree, and that's a shame.
Yeah.
Because, but I don't think it could. I mean, I honestly don't. I can't think of anybody who could have made it really work. I don't understand why anybody would want to make it work. That's really my...
Well, yeah, it's basically, you know, Bob has an affair, Carol's okay with it because it was just sex. They try to drag their friends Ted and Alice into their new swinger lifestyle, and then they...
Well, they're not really swingers.
Right.
They're talking about it, and they think maybe they can entice their friends into it.
Right.
And ultimately, they won't they? The end is a big question mark, even at the end of...
Right. But the questions that this show raises were answered a long time ago.
We should name the people. Carol was Jennifer Damiano. I really need to take this over here.
Sure.
Alice was Ana Noguera. Bob was Joel Perez, whom I remember from the Sutton Foster Sweet Charity. He was in that.
Right. Ironically, he looks like Elliot Gould, who played Ted in the movie.
Right. They may have cast him.
He's playing the Robert Culp role, but he looks like Elliot Gould.
And the hook for the show is Michael Zegan, who is Mr. Maisel.
Yes, Mr. Maisel, who I guess knows a thing or two about infidelity.
Probably. And doesn't look, and reminded me so much of the character from The Big Bang Theory who wears the tight pants.
Howard, I think.
Howard, yes, I would, because Howard is a throwback to that kind of dressing. This is what he looked like to me.
Your conclusion, or you know what, I'll start,
okay.
2.5.
I would say that's generous.
You can go lower if you like.
I'm leaning toward 2. I'm really leaning toward 2. I'm sorry, Signature.
Our next show is Paris. This is the debut play by Ebony Booth, directed by, I think it's Nude Adams. It's spelled K-N-U-D.
I would think it's an interesting first name.
And it does indeed take place in Paris, just probably not the one you're thinking of. No, this is Paris, Vermont, 1995. And it is a store, kind of a Walmart-type store. And it starts as many brilliant sitcoms like Taxi, Mary Tyler Moore, and Cheers have started with a young woman coming in and applying for a job. And she gets it. The young woman is played by Jules Latimer. And I won't call it a dream job, but certainly a step up from the type of jobs that she's had. And she's desperate to make ends meet. So she starts working there, and she finds that it's not the greatest job in the world, but it's the best that anyone in that town can hope for.
It's $5 an hour, and that's,
this is 1995.
It's still $5 an hour.
$5 an hour in Paris, Vermont was pretty good.
Evidently.
Not easy to work there. She's working for her boss is someone who was in her shoes not too long ago. You'd think he'd be sympathetic, but not really. And then there are the assortment. There's the one who's just the woman, the bitter woman employee, the
Maxine.
Maxine, yes.
Danielle Strauss died.
Right. And then the one who's, I'm going to do this show, my showcase, I'm going to be brilliant, etc. And it's a decent ensemble. And the thing that really stood out to me was Jules Latimer as the young lady. I mean, I wasn't even sure whether she was male or female at first, but she just has such a subtle, original approach to the role.
She was a blank slate.
Yes.
But not in an unappealing way.
Right, exactly. And I've never seen that before. And I really enjoyed it. The play itself, more or less what you might expect of that situation on there. It's, has some laughs, mostly dramatic, and a respectable debut effort, but ultimately...
I really want to point out Wendy Ann McDonough, who's a veteran performer and who is a little bit of a thing. We met her out on the street, and she's about, she's really tiny. But she carries the play in a very special way because she's the heart of the back of it. She's a drunk, but she tries to pull people into, come on, we can all do this, we can do it.
Right.
And then she takes another drink. And she was just phenomenal, I thought. But what really interested me about this is I kept thinking of Superstore. I'm a fan of Superstore, which ostensibly takes place in a different kind of, it's more of a Kmart kind of store. But this is just in the back room.
Well, this could be a Kmart.
This is just the back room, which is where all the stuff goes on. And it's sort of like being in the back of a restaurant, where people spit in your food kind of thing. You get to see all the things that go wrong.
Right.
So,
and how the employees will come together for each other. Right.
And another veteran actor is James Murtaugh, who played Wendy's husband, who's an unsuccessful success book seller. I don't know if that makes sense, but you understand what I'm saying. He tries to sell books.
Well, he has this program. It's kind of like a pyramid scheme.
It is a pyramid scheme.
And he's trying to push it on the employees.
And none of whom have any money, and none of whom can afford to buy any of it.
Right.
So,
And all of whom, really... it's not the best place to work, but it is the best place that they're going to get.
And they all need the job
and they all know it.
And they live paycheck
and the store
to paycheck.
Knows it.
And that hasn't changed, even though this is set in 1995.
No, it's
when we saw, and there's another play called Skeleton Crew, and it's a whole new genre that's coming up about the working person, the lives of the working person.
Right. Bottom line is, it's a very respectable debut.
Yes.
But I think 3.25 is really all I could give it.
Well, I did want to say that Ebony Booth is also an actress.
Yes.
And was just in a show called Dance Nation. And I think it's a remarkable. She's still a student at Juilliard in the
I think
playwriting.
we'll see a lot of nice things coming from her.
I think so. Yes.
Finally, and we have to do this quickly.
Well, okay.
A soldier's play.
We can't do Soldier's Play quickly. It's too big a play to do quickly. Soldier's Play was 1981, very famous show by the Negro Ensemble Company.
Yes.
And it has been done so often, and the sad thing is that it's still relevant. And what it's about is it's about the first integrated, 1944.
No, it's not integrated.
1944, sorry. Okay, the first, well, they're going into an integrated situation. 45 is when it got integrated.
Right.
44.
Right now, they're segregated.
Yes.
The barrack is all black. The sergeant is black. The captain, yes, is white, but
in comes a black captain played by Blair Underwood. I'm going to just do that
to
again.
investigate the murder of a black sergeant.
Yes.
The sergeant who was leading this group.
Yes. And there's the white captain played by
Jerry.
Jerry O'Connell.
Right.
Is just flabbergasted that there's a black captain. He just can't wrap his mind around that.
Well, it's an ironic role because O'Connell this was one of the people under his command, and he wants the murder solved, but he feels that having a black captain handling it is going to impede that.
Well, yeah, you can understand why if you can
Yes.
put yourself into his mindset. By the way, the black sergeant is played by David Allen Grier
Right.
in a role that won Adolph Caesar an Oscar nomination when it became a movie. And this play, when it went to the movies, also helped Denzel Washington's career. And David Allen Grier was in that, and he was in the original production at Negro Ensemble Company as another person in the barracks. So this is his life in this play.
Well, and he gives the standout performance. This is a man, he's very conflicted. On the one hand, he's an army sergeant. On the other hand, he's a black man, and he doesn't feel totally comfortable in either world. You'll see him with the men, and he is 100% army. You'll see him on his own, and you realize, again, all done in flashback, and you'll see how conflicted it is. And this is really the standout of the play.
Well, it's more than just being conflicted. He believes that you're either a Geechee or which is his generic term for anybody who's Southern, black, and therefore, to his way of thinking, not up to standard, not smart, and then Northern or at least educated black. And he separates, and he's horrible to the men. He's a terrible person. And they don't. The thing is that everybody doesn't mind that he's gone. You know, they want to solve the murder, but he's gone. Nobody really cares.
And there are certain assumptions about the murder. You know, it's down south, so there are assumptions that.
Well, that's the trick of the play, and
Right.
it's very well done.
Performance-wise, I did like David Allen Grier very much. Blair Underwood, who is in his mid-50s, he comes out on stage, his shirt is unbuttoned, and he gets a big round of applause from the female members of the audience.
Well, some of them.
Both him and Jerry O'Connell, I just felt that they were under-rehearsed. They seemed very unsure of their footing at times. It looked like maybe this was by design, but they really didn't seem properly prepared for their roles.
And I didn't get that impression, but okay.
Again, this was my first time with the play. I know you've seen it multiple times.
Well, I didn't see the original at Negro Ensemble, but I did see the movie.
Yeah. I also feel that while the play is still relevant, it has aged only moderately well.
Well, it won the Pulitzer Prize in 1981. And
Bob Carroll's Head and Alice also won
didn't
many
win a
accolades.
Pulitzer,
No, not a Pulitzer, but it was a critically acclaimed play. And whether this is aged quite as well, I am not so sure.
Well, it was a big deal for the Negro Ensemble Company. It really put them on the map. I mean, they were already on the map, but it really helped.
But this put them front and center stage, certainly.
Well, they started in the 60s, so they'd been around for a long time. But this was a big help. Speaking of the Negro Ensemble, did we give our credits to this?
Go for it.
Well, I would give this a 4.
All right. I would give it...
And that's due to Kenny Leon's direction. I thought he made it taut.
3 1/4.
Okay.
I was bothered by the way that the actors were handled, given that they weren't always sure-footed with their performance. Moving on, speaking of the Negro Ensemble Company.
Speaking of the Negro Ensemble Company, we were able to get down to their new headquarters, which is Theater St. Mark's at 80 St. Mark's Place. Theater 80 is the name of it. And there we saw a play written by ntozake shange, who's
Better known for
Colored Girls,
right?
which we just saw and really liked.
And directed by her sister.
By her sister, adapted and directed by her sister, Ifa Bayeza, called A Photograph, Lovers in Motion. And it's really two pieces that she put together.
It is the sole straight play that she's ever done. Poetry in motion was really her thing. We went down to the theater and asked Ifa why she chose to do the play.
I always felt it was unfinished, like a gemstone that hadn't been cut or polished yet. And I loved it because as a playwright myself, I found her experiments with dialogue really fascinating. This is the only dialogue play she has done. And there was such richness in her characters who, in this instance, actually talk to each other. I wanted to see if I could help her to re-envision it and to finish it, to polish it so that it would shine like some of her other works.
When did you become aware of this play, and when did you start working on it?
Oh, well, Saki's my sister. We've been aware of each other's work from junior high school when we were in orchestra and band together. When
did she actually write this?
77. It was right after For Colored Girls and her association with the public, and Joe Papp asked her, well, can you write a dialogue play? And she said, all right, here, you know. And theater was always a kind of second love, almost courtesan of Zaki's, in that performance poetry and poetry was her primary passion. And I was the one who convinced her to let theater artists do her work and see what could become of it. And that led to For Colored Girls, the phenomenon, and some other opportunities to create choreo poems that were actually for ensemble. But she always had a suspicion of people who weren't doing their own words, but someone else's.
What was it like when you started working on it? What did you polish?
Well, it was a time of challenge for my sister. She had had a number of really debilitating illnesses, 2 strokes, a neuropathy that came from some of the medication that she was taking, and she couldn't hold a pen. This was in 2015, 2014 when NEC approached her about doing a play for their reading series, The Year of the Woman. And they had originally wanted to do Spell Number 7, which was her 3rd work, I think, after For Colored Girls. And it's another choreo poem in structure. So I said, why don't you surprise them? You know, give the audience something that they aren't expecting. Why don't you work in this dialogue play? And it was also a way of trying to, I thought it could be a way of coaxing her back into whatever new way of expression she was going to be able to do. I said, if you can't write it, then tell me. And I started asking her a series of questions to try and fill in the blanks to see how we could reconstruct the work.
Before we get too far away from it, I did want to mention that you're an award-winning playwright in your own right,
Yes,
with your Emmett Till trilogy, which you've mentioned before is just about to open in Washington.
That's right, that's right. I'm so thrilled. Mosaic Theater Company of D.C. Is going to mount the trilogy in full as a rotating repertory of 3 plays, an ensemble of 9 actors, playing over 3 months. So we're taking up, 3 plays of the season, so I can get to actually see this work in its full realization.
As you envisioned.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Okay, well, getting back to
April 1st. Yes.
Okay, April 1st. Now, getting back to this, you mentioned that you were working with her on it. How did it change? Did some?
Well, quite a few things. The major change for me that I was encouraging her to do was to shift the focus to the character of Michael, because the character of Michael, who was so important in the drama, was extremely underwritten.
Now, Michael is one of 3 women that
Right.
the main character is involved with.
Right. So, well, it's interesting you phrase it that way. I would say that Michael enters the world of another aspiring artist who is involved with 3 other people, two of whom are women and one of whom is a man. And when this aspiring photographer, who is also sort of a grifter, who has discovered that he has talent, but it's a way for him to, move through the world, encounters an artist who really is impassioned and brilliant, and who sees in him that same potential, begins to fall in love with her. So I don't see her as one of 3 women with whom Sean David is involved, but as this kind of creative interloper who enters this dystopian world that he's in and starts to show him other possibilities. And in the process, everybody's world really fractures. And ntozake wasn't about to rewrite it. There are certain things that my sister is in the aesthetic of jazz, it comes straight out. Or people say that Mozart used to write his symphonies and they would just be exact on the page from the first time hearing it. He wasn't a recomposer, she wasn't a rewriter. So I knew she wasn't going to take that apart. So then my role as director is to figure out, well, how do I get the lead actors back into the story? And I said, use the dance, use the way Michael is seeing the world as a way of creating what's happening between them in another scene that's nonverbal, but that is all movement.
Do you think your sister would be pleased with the results?
Yes. I mean, she was able to see the reading back in 2015, and she was excited about that.
And that is our show for this evening. When you go to the theater, look for Leslie and me, us too.
On the aisle.